Good morning, Jen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to this Zoom chat about your artwork. What do you call your artwork? Do you have a generic name?
For these specific icons, I started off calling them ofrenda icons because they were commissioned by a person who is in charge of this people of color centered conference. And she wanted to create a sort of ofrenda look, sort of an altar type idea, where people could come and see icons that represented themselves, where they saw themselves represented in icons. So originally I called them ofrenda icons. Now I just refer to them as icons or as saints. Yeah.
So you've been doing artwork a while, haven't you?
I have. I started out drawing. I've been drawing all my life. I started painting back in 2013, and I've been sculpting for a long time as well. But I've really gotten into it probably in the last 5 years or so. Yeah.
Okay. And kind of give me a little bit of your portfolio, the different directions you've taken your artwork.
Sure, yeah. So most of my work historically has focused on women's issues, as I myself am a woman, and so I wanted to focus on things that I've had personal experience with. So I do a lot of more figural work, usually more representational instead of abstract, although I've explored a little bit of abstract in my work as well. Up until I did the saints pieces, before that, my work had focused more on sort of the norms that society has constructed for women, for our role, for how we should act, how we should look, how we should sound, and kind of questioning some of those norms, some of those roles, and also exploring how violence is associated with those things, how our looks can be a part of creating violence against us because of the society that we live in, how our speaking out can create violence against us, things like that. So that's kind of where I come from historically. And then when my friend initially approached me to do this sort of icon series for her conference, the idea of doing portraits was not super new to me, but the idea of doing very specific commissioned portraits of specific people was very new to me. So ever since then, I've been kind of delving a little deeper into that and thinking about the idea of who is and who isn't represented in art, in the art world, who gets to see people that look like them and who doesn't, and how does that feel, to not see yourself represented or to see yourself represented, and how you see yourself represented, right? So that's kind of what I'm still sort of in that mindset lately with my art. I'm also doing a little more autobiographical work, as I think all artists probably do at some point, or should do, right? To kind of explore their own roots, where they've come from, and what shapes their identity.
Cool. Now, of course, we asked you to come here to Old St. Mary's, as you said, during Black History Month, and to see representations of people and saints or saintly people who maybe are not the usual depictions that people think of.
Yep.
And so I've actually I've got slides here of the images themselves, and I was wondering if you would kind of give us a docent tour of your images, and maybe where the inspiration for each particular one came from, and a little bit of the story with it, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay. We started out with this one, with the Black Madonna, which we thought we wanted to be the entry piece for people coming into the church, kind of connection to Old St. Mary's, but there you are.
Sure, there I am. Yep. So that's Black Madonna. I don't think any parent is supposed to say that one child is their favorite, but if my paintings are my children, I think Black Madonna is probably my favorite. She was commissioned by a friend of mine who was looking for a Madonna, Mary, Mother of Jesus portrait painting that did not have Mary depicted as a white woman, which we know historically that she was not a white woman. So she asked me if I would attempt to do a painting for her. And this was a really, probably the most challenging one of all the saint icons I did, because not only did I not have any reference photos of Mary, but there are, you know, a lot of different opinions on what exactly Mary would have looked like. And for myself, having grown up Catholic, I grew up venerating Mary, and I think the idea of depicting her is just staggering and frightening in some ways. And I thought I would never be able to do it justice, and probably I didn't. But I had such a profound experience when I was painting her. I did a lot of research around the area that Mary was said to be from, and the customs of that time, how she may have dressed, what she may have worn. But then once I started painting, it sort of just took on a life of its own, and I kind of just had to go with it, which can be really frustrating at times, because I would think, I just don't know if this is working or not. But in the end, it felt like it had its own life. It had its own voice, so to speak. And so just a little background. So the idea of Black Madonna, when people use that term Black Madonna, it's just a general term referring to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and sometimes depicted on her own, sometimes depicted with baby Jesus, just referring to images of her depicted as Black or with dark skin. And some of those have been intentional, and some of them have just been images that changed over the years, due to like candle smoke, or aging of the painting in general. So you see it in Catholic and Orthodox areas. So that's, there are tons of them online. If you look up Black Madonna, you see a lot of different references to her.
I remember my first reference to it. A friend of mine was a parishioner at Our Lady of Częstochowa in Milwaukee. If it sounds like a Polish parish, bingo. But what they would claim was the most famous Black Madonna is actually in Poland, and it's an icon, and it's a depiction of her. So it can have a wide range of meanings.
Yeah.
Recently, I came across something on YouTube. I wish I had written it down, what it was, but it was a woman taking us through the cultural references of Mary. She was an artist, so she was depicting Mary with various face paints and with jewelry and a particular type of garb. And what's neat about that is that for people who are figuring out their spirituality and connection to God, to find in Mary a connection for themselves. And I don't think either Mary or Jesus are embarrassed if we picture them like us, because I think Jesus' whole story of coming in human flesh tries to ennoble all of us. Yes,
exactly. I love that. A general description of her, and then that QR code will just take you to more information, online about her.
Sure. Okay.
So this is Sandra Bland, and most people probably have heard her name by now. This was, I think, back in 2013 or 2015 that this happened. So Sandra Bland is actually a Naperville native. She's from Naperville, Illinois, but she was in Texas when she passed. So she was 28 years old. She was stopped by a cop in a sort of routine traffic stop. What actually happened is interesting. So that the police officer that stopped her was known for doing these really minor kind of mundane traffic stops as an excuse to try to find something more criminal going on. So that in the past 12 months prior to his stopping Sandra Bland, he had issued something like 1,600 tickets in a 12-month period. So this was kind of his MO. This is what he did. She's driving along the road. He pulls up really fast behind her, so she switches lanes to get out of his way. And then he proceeds to stop her for not signaling to switch lanes to get out of his way. So, and just a little history on Sandra Bland. So she graduated from Prairie View A&M University in Texas. She was involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and spoke out a lot against police violence. And so this was already kind of in her mind. She had been through several traffic stops in the past where things had happened. So she was already, I would say, on alert when she was going through this traffic stop. The officer issues her a ticket and then tells her to put out her cigarette, to which she responds, "Why do I have to put out my cigarette? I'm in my own car." Things escalate from there. He forces her out of the car. They end up in an altercation, and then he arrests her for assaulting a police officer and takes her to jail. And then 3 days later, she's found dead in her cell. And so that, you know, while the official sort of cause was listed as, you know, suicide by hanging, there's a lot of outcry and protesting by her loved ones and from people across the nation, really saying, look, this was not handled appropriately. There's dash cam video, there's her video, there's all these things that show that this police officer did not follow protocol, and that you know, her mental health was not considered when she was actually put in the jail cell. And so you know, I think she's a great example of this idea that sort of who are the people that we look to in our modern day? You know, who do we call a saint, right? Is it someone who we could say is a perfect person that doesn't have any faults, or is it somebody that is trying to live their lives in the best way possible, is trying to be a better person, and you know, and sometimes someone would even say we're martyred for their cause, right? I think that it's very difficult to continually hear stories about police violence against people of color, particularly against women of color, because of that power dynamic that's in play. And so, yeah, I think there's a really good documentary on HBO that I would recommend that people check out if they want to find out more about Sandra's story and about the things that have come out of this case. Of course, we know that this case and none of the other cases have actually ended police violence. And so this is an ongoing thing to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly the parallel issue with this mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have that case now in New York.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lack of, I'd say, comprehensive mental health training for police officers, and they're going into these situations with one specific particular type of training, right? But they're not adequately prepared for things that don't fall within that specific subset, right? And it just ends up in tragedy so many times. Yeah.
So Sandra helps us to think about all these things, and of course, this is her connection and the QR code and all that. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is Grace Lee Boggs. So we included her even, you know, in Black History Month, even though she herself is not Black, because she's adjacent to a lot of Black activism that was going on during the Civil Rights Movement. And I think she's a great representation of an ally and what an ally activist looks like. So Grace Lee Boggs was a Chinese American. She passed away a few years ago at the age of 100. And this is the thing about, I mean, there's so many interesting things about Grace Lee Boggs. You really gotta look her up and read some of her stuff. She wrote her last book, I think it was her 5th book that she had written. She wrote it at the age of 95. So what I love, one of the things I love about her is just that she represents the timelessness of what we're able to do, right? Like there's no limit for people who think, you know, oh, I didn't start early enough in life, or you know, I'm in my twilight years. What is there left to do? This woman was just at it until the very end, which I just love. I love. And so she worked together with her husband, James Boggs, who was a Black activist. They moved to Detroit together, and they worked in the civil rights movement. She was also really active in a lot of Asian American activism. And that's really relevant for today as well, because there is a lot of increased anti-Asian sentiment and a lot of violence against Asian Americans going on right now because of, I'll say, misconceptions about coronavirus and things like that. So she did a lot of work around Asian American rights and equity. And she and her husband actually founded this thing called Detroit Summer, which is like a multicultural, intergenerational youth program in Detroit. I mean, among other things, there's so many things that she was a part of. And I think it's also interesting, if you look her up, you can read more about this, but she has this interesting trajectory of her life where when she was younger, when she started out, she was more involved in kind of some far left activities. And as she lived through her life, you can see how she sort of adjusted and changed to fit where her beliefs were developing and growing. And I think that's a beautiful example for us to look to as well, right? Like we are always learning, right? We're always finding new information. We're always hearing new things, and we need to be flexible in that, right? We need to be able to adjust our beliefs and say, oh, I didn't know this before, and now I do, so I can, you know, adjust where I'm at based on that.
And what you're saying about the crossovers that take place. So here's a very active woman again. So as we've bridged the gap from Black History Month to Women's Month, as the term xenophobia has become more part of our cultural conversation, you know, we see around us again that what people think racism isn't what it is. It's really about getting to know people and caring about them. And so seeing crossovers, seeing humanity, and then recognizing that there are examples throughout our history of people being inhuman and people being very compassionate, and that whole range. So,
historically and still today, absolutely. Yeah.
So figuring out how to kind of take up her mantle of activism and work for better conditions for everyone.
Yeah. So this is Dr. Barbara Holmes, who is still alive today. She's a contemporary. So she has a website, drbarbaraholmes.com, that you can check out. I don't know if that's what I have linked to on the QR code, but you can visit that and find out a lot about her. So she is a contemplative theologian. She's a writer. She's an activist. She's brilliant. So she has a master's in education, an MDiv, and a doctorate in religion, I think with a focus on ethics, and a law degree. So she's just like, this woman is brilliant. And her work focuses on African-American spirituality, mysticism, and cosmology. So it's very, very unfamiliar for me. This is not something I had ever experienced before or looked into. And so when I was doing research on her, for me, the thing about Barbara Holmes was that it was such a new discovery that I was at first like, I didn't know this existed. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. What is cosmology? What does African-American spirituality and mysticism mean? Like, does that have any relevance to me at all? Or is that completely foreign? And that's what she's a great example of for me, is that there are things that you may think are just completely foreign to you that have nothing to do with you whatsoever. And then as you read them, you can think, oh, actually, this makes a lot of sense. Like, this is really interesting. I am interested in the origins of the universe and thinking about how God created what God created, and the different ways that different people groups express that and manifest that. And so, yeah, she's a really interesting person. I think she may be the only, if I think about it, she may be the only person in my Saint Icon series that is still alive to this day. So that was a little intimidating on its own, painting someone who's, who's still alive. But yeah, she's a very interesting academic to look up to, for sure.
Has she seen the painting?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. I don't know if I hope she has or if I hope she hasn't. But yeah, I don't know if she's seen it or not. I don't actually personally know her. Yeah.
A few years ago, when I was a campus minister at a Catholic high school, and we had a faculty presentation by the sister whose name escapes me at the moment, who was president of Cincinnati Dominicans. And she was talking about the history of women in the church, in particular, women religious, because early on, what convents existed to do was to give young women who had no dowry, especially were poor, who didn't have access to food and shelter, it gave them a place to go. It gave them a place to survive, and as we can also see, also thrive. So, but what she said was, when she was doing her presentation, the church, however, wasn't quite ready for women religious being educated, and they weren't ready for how talented the women were. And so when we look at the history of religious orders, and I mean, I'm always amazed at the number of women religious who I've talked to who have degrees in mechanical engineering because they had to run the boilers and stuff in the convent. That they have degrees in theology, law, it's any field. It's wide open, and it's great. And so that sometimes for us priests to recognize the women in front of us maybe have more and better education than we do, and the added advantage that they get to be among the regular working people and understand how all this fits together. So I want to give a shout out to women's religious orders too.
Yes, absolutely. I think in some ways, some parts of the church are still not ready for women who are educated and have something to offer, but God speaks through all of us. And I think women, there are so many women that have such a powerful voice and important things to say, that we have a unique perspective. And yeah, it goes back to being able to hear something from someone different than you and letting God speak through anyone. So, yeah.
So the last picture, of course, is in a certain sense the oldest person.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe my second favorite after Black Madonna. This is Black Moses, or Moses the Black, or Abba Moses the Black. He goes by a few different names. Not Moses, biblical Moses, as some people may think. This Moses was a 4th century desert father, as they call him. He was a monk, but he didn't start out that way. This guy is so interesting. When I read his story, I was fascinated. So he was this Ethiopian guy who basically was really apparently very big and intimidating, very violent, very angry man. He was basically a gang leader, and would lead this sort of gang of criminals doing, stealing things, robbing people, things like that. So basically, he's on the run from the authorities at one point, and he goes and hides. The stories differ a little, but what some people say is he's going and he hides with this group of monks to hide out from the authorities. And so he's seeing them, and he sees how they're so peaceful and so content, and he sees their dedication to their lifestyle, and he's just won over by it. And he's like, I'm gonna become a monk. And so he becomes a Christian. He gets baptized, and he joins their community. But this is the interesting thing, right? So he has this huge shift in his life, this huge transformation. but he still has all these struggles. Like, he still has a really bad temper. He's so angry. He has a really hard time. And he talks about, with his fellow monks, he talks about how he can never be perfect enough. And that was such a hard thing for him that he constantly struggled with, which I really resonate with, right? This imperfection of, even when you are making these good decisions for your life, you still feel like, man, I just keep falling down, or like, why can't I get rid of this aspect of myself that I feel like is not good or not holy or whatever. And yet he kept pressing forward, and it's such a huge difference from the beginning to the ending of his life. I think there's a lot of other stories about him that you can read too, but just the way that his life was transformed by him seeing these monks and the way they lived, and the peace and contentment they had is really interesting to me. So he's probably my second favorite after Black Madonna, for sure.
He seems fairly young.
Yeah, he was, I don't remember how old he was when he first became a monk. But he died fairly young for the time. I think he was like 75 or something like that when he died. Yeah, but he was a young brawler for a bit. Yeah, before he converted. So, and I tried to convey this sort of calm but anger, sort of at the same time, in his face, right? This feeling of like that thing is still there. And I really do think that God can use those aspects of ourselves that we find troubling, and can transform them. I think, for me, for a long time, man, I used to pray all the time that God would make me a more gentle, quiet person, because I'm just not a gentle, quiet person. And I think eventually, my prayers changed, and I feel like God has really used this sort of, louder, boisterous personality that I have for good, right? So I think Moses the Black is a really great example for us that, we don't all have to become a cookie cutter version of what a saint looks like, what a Christian looks like, whatever looks like. I think we can be used and should be used as we are, as the people that we are.
And it wouldn't take much for me to picture him on a skateboard on Michigan Avenue.
Sure, right? Yeah, he could be a contemporary easily. Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed reading the Desert Fathers, and what's great about reading them is they manage to get paragraphs of thought into like a sentence.
Yes.
and their stories are just great. And of course,
Yeah.
what a lot of people don't realize is, besides having the Desert Fathers, you also have the Desert Mothers.
Yes.
And the same and yet different
Yes.
way of understanding how God reaches into each individual person and takes them forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And as I said, I wanted to get your plug in as well.
Thanks.
So
Yeah. So this is my contact info. I think the QR code may go to my Etsy store. I have a website. I have an Etsy store where people can buy prints of any of these. I also have several other saints with really, really fascinating stories that people can check out. Yeah. Thanks for doing that. I appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. And thank you for joining me, and thank you for sharing with us the paintings, which we're going to give back to you. And when you come, you'll be able to see Miss Gorman's, who spoke at the
Amanda Gorman. Yes. Amanda Gorman. Yeah.
So she's
just an amazing person. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's a granddaughter of one of our parishioners.
Oh, that's incredible.
So that was
that's a nice connection.
Yeah, when her grandmother told us, well, my granddaughter's going to be at the inauguration, we really didn't think anything of it. She didn't give us any background or history. And then I think she eventually said, oh, and she's a poet. And she's going to do the poem.
She's speaking at the inauguration.
Yeah. But I've had a chance to look her up online, and Kelly Clarkson made a connection between her and a young girl over in Great Britain. She wrote a poem about Colonel Tom Colonel Tom was this retired military, 90 some years old, who walked to raise money for the COVID relief effort over in Great Britain. And he set out as a goal, I think he was trying to raise like $1,000 or whatever, and ended up raising $1 million and some.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And got knighted by the Queen. But then he unfortunately succumbed to COVID a few months later. So he
Oh, wow.
But the connection between these two young women and a new poet and a veteran poet of 20 years
Yes.
old, and Kelly Clarkson saying that when we can do it, we'll bring you guys over to meet and collaborate.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I love that.
So just as you are an example to us of artists working in the visual arts, Amanda and company are at work in the literary arts. And so
I
it's
love
great.
that.
It's great we have this convergence of these different types. And I think the other thing that as the new administration has come in, that people have overlooked is that for the last year, last 4 years, we've had kind of a dearth in the arts. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
the promotion
Absolutely.
of people that captivate our imagination and move our hearts.
Yep, absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing that come back. Yeah. And I think it's always been there, right? It's just been it's been squelched over the last few years. But I think, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, you know, blossoming again, coming back out in the open. Yeah. Such a vital thing, I think.
Well, thank you for captivating our imagination and moving our
Thank you
hearts.
for having me.
And,
Yeah, it was great.
And feel free to drop in anytime. And if you have some particular ideas, or if you'd like to hear some of our people talk about ideas, we could always have a night of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Likewise.